This mandate for leadership document, I got to say, it reads more like a political thriller than a policy paper.
Yeah, right.
This deep dive into how a conservative president might reshape the executive branch. It's got drama, intrigue, enough acronyms to make your head spin.
What I found striking was just how seriously they take the challenge. I mean, this isn't about, like, fine-tuning, right?
Right.
They're talking about a modern executive branch that's basically, like, gone rogue, way off track from what they see as, its proper place.
It's like they're hitting the reset button, the whole system. They even used the word tyrannical at one point. That's not pulling any punches.
Intense, right. But it shows how crucial they believe it is for a conservative president to take back control, They see this power shift towards unelected agencies, and they want it back where they believe it belongs, in the president's hands.
It's not about shrinking government, though, right? It's more like they want to wield that power differently, more strategically.
About 100%.
And that's where their game plan for the EOP, the Executive Office of the President, comes into play.
Huge emphasis on that. They see the EOP, the president's closest advisors, as this, like, untapped resource. Like, past administrations haven't used it to its full potential to, really shape the bureaucracy.
So less wrecking ball and more surgical strike.
Exactly.
But to do that, you got to know the machine inside and out. And the first lever they pull, the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget. Now, I always thought they were just the number crunchers.
Yeah, the bean counters, right?
Calculators glued to their hands.
That's the image, for sure. But in this document, they argue the OMB is actually, like, the president's most powerful tool.
Yeah.
They call it air traffic control for policy. That one really jumped out at me.
That's a powerful image. What do they mean by that?
Okay, so instead of just adding up the numbers, right, they want the OMB actively shaping policy, like strategically channeling funds to where the president wants to go and, well, maybe letting other stuff fall by the wayside.
So less about across-the-board cuts and more like winners and losers.
Exactly. And they give a concrete example of how to do it. It's called apportionments.
Apportion. Okay, you lost me.
It's basically how the OMB doles out money to the agencies throughout the year. And they're saying, put political appointees in charge of that.
Okay.
Make sure the agencies fall in line.
So you're an agency head, super excited about your new program, but the OMB, not so much.
Exactly.
They could just turn off the funding faucet and boom, you're dead in the water.
You got it. It's leverage. Big time. They even want to restructure the OMB, bring in even more political appointees to embed that control over policy. They want their people making the calls.
It's a very different view of the OMB than I think most people have.
Yeah.
And speaking of assertive action, they don't hold back when it comes to regulations either, do they?
Oh, absolutely not. Big focus on what they call the regulatory state and their weapon of choice. This little-known office within the OMB, it's called OIRA, the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs.
Well, IRA, okay, got to be honest, not ringing a bell.
Yeah, most people haven't.
Give me the rundown.
Think of them as the gatekeepers for any new regulation.
Yeah.
They review all these proposed rules from every corner of government, and they're making sure they fit with the president's agenda. The document wants to keep Executive Order 12866, which basically forces agencies to do this rigorous cost-benefit analysis for any new regulation.
So proving it'll actually help more than it costs, which on paper makes sense, but doing that for every single regulation for the entire government.
Sounds like a nightmare, right?
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting. They want to go even further. They're saying that even these independent agencies, like the Fed, the SEC,
right,
they shouldn't be exempt.
Wow. So even those agencies that are supposed to be a little bit, like, outside of politics.
They're saying true accountability means everybody's got to play by the same rules.
Interesting.
And to give OIRA the teeth to actually do this, they're suggesting a big funding boost.
I mean, they're clearly serious about this, but it does seem a little one-sided, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Regulations, I mean, they're there for a reason, right? Protect people, the environment. There's a balance to be struck.
Oh, for sure. And it's important to remember that there are definitely different views on how much regulation is the right amount,
Yeah.
What we're talking about here is one specific perspective.
Right, of course.
And it's not the only view out there, but this document, it's coming from this place of wanting to minimize the burden of regulations, especially on businesses. Now, whether that actually addresses other concerns, like you said, health, safety, that's a whole other conversation.
Right, it's a bigger debate.
For sure. But it is interesting how they lay out their reasoning.
Right.
And they don't stop at just this cost-benefit analysis.
Us more.
They want to bring back some of those Trump-era executive orders that were all about making regulations more transparent, more efficient, you know?
Oh, interesting. So they see those past efforts as worth revisiting. But those executive orders, they're not exactly set in stone, right? A new president can just come in and reverse them pretty easily.
Exactly, which is why they also talk about working with Congress to make actual laws about this stuff, you know, long-term game. They
Yeah.
want to make these changes harder to undo.
So a two-pronged attack, immediate action with executive orders, and then a longer-term strategy through legislation. They're playing chess, not checkers.
100%.
And when it comes to national security, they're not messing around there either.
Yeah, this section is fascinating. They want a National Security Council, the NSC, that is laser-focused on the president's agenda, streamlined, efficient.
The president's agenda being the key phrase there, I imagine. But how do you actually make that happen? I mean, the NSC, it's got people from all these different agencies with their own priorities, their own ways of doing things.
Okay, well, buckle up, because this is where it gets interesting. They propose a pretty major shakeup. Like, imagine a president coming in on day one and being like, we're getting rid of entire directorates within the NSC that don't fit with my vision, and we're creating new ones that do.
Wow. Talk about cleaning house.
Right, and it's not just moving the boxes around on the org chart, you know?
Right.
They're talking about replacing people, specifically holdovers from previous administrations, especially in key spots.
So loyalty is a big deal.
Huge. They want people in there who share the president's worldview, no question.
Well.
Oh, and they want the president to have more direct control over the military.
Interesting.
There's this big emphasis on traditional roles, traditional missions, over what they call, quote-unquote, social engineering.
Social engineering. So we're talking about things like diversity initiatives, LGBTQ plus inclusion, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. They're saying these things might be important, but not as important as the military's core function, which is national defense.
It's a pretty clear stance for sure.
Yeah.
And it seems to be part of this larger pattern we're seeing, right? Centralizing power, putting it firmly in the hands of the president and their chosen few.
You got it. They're talking about a much more assertive, less deferential presidency when it comes to national security. They believe a strong leader needs to act decisively, not get bogged down in bureaucracy or dissenting opinions.
It's a really interesting look into how they see executive power. And we've covered a lot already. OMB, OIRA, NSC. It's like bureaucracy 101.
Right.
But we're not done yet, are we? There's more to this executive branch puzzle.
Oh, there's way more. We haven't even touched on what they want to do with the National Economic Council, the U.S. Trade Representative, or the very interesting role they see for the vice president.
Oh, I guess we'll have to save that for part 2 of our deep dive.
Sounds like a plan. It really is. Like, we're putting together this, like, intricate machine,
right.
Seeing how each piece fits into this conservative vision for the executive branch.
Yeah.
And up next, we've got the National Economic Council, the NEC.
The NEC, right.
Yeah.
The president's economic A-team.
Exactly.
Advising on everything from taxes to trade deals, the whole shebang.
The whole 9 yards.
What does this blueprint say about them?
Big emphasis on coordination.
Okay.
They really hit hard on how the NEC can't just be off in its own little world, you know? They need to be joined at the hip with the rest of the EOP, the Council of Economic Advisors, the OMB, even the National Security Council.
Interesting.
They see economic policy as, like, totally intertwined with everything else.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Present united front.
Exactly.
But it's not all hand-holding and singing Kumbaya, right?
Well, no.
Do they actually get into the nitty-gritty of how the NEC should operate?
They do, actually. Like, they're really insistent that the NEC needs people who get the regulatory process.
Okay.
Not that they need to be experts themselves, because that's OMB's job, remember?
Right.
But they need to be switched on to how regulations can impact the economy big time.
It's like they say, no plan survives contact with the enemy, right?
Right.
Except here, the enemy is like unintended consequences.
Exact.
The NEC's got to be thinking 10 steps ahead.
Yep.
See how a tweak to, say, environmental rules might ripple through the stock market or affect a trade deal, that kind of thing.
You got it. They want them proactive, not reacting after the fact.
Got it.
And this actually links to another big relationship they focus on, the one between the NEC and the Council of Economic Advisors.
The CEA, right. The data whizzes.
Exactly.
Remind me again what their main gig is.
Think of them as the reality check.
Okay.
They're giving the president that constant feed of economic data, you know, forecasts, and really importantly, they analyze what policies are actually going to, like what the impact will be.
So the NEC is cooking up the policy stew, and the CEA is making sure it's not going to make everyone sick.
Love that analogy. And they're clear that it shouldn't just be a rubber stamp. They
Right.
want the CEA really digging into the numbers, making sure policy is based on solid data, not just ideology.
Which makes sense, especially when you're talking about something as potentially volatile as the economy.
Oh, for sure.
Speaking of which, and speaking of potential economic headaches, let's talk trade.
Okay.
Specifically, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, the USTR.
Ah, yes, the USTR.
How do they see that office fitting into all of this?
Well, they don't mince words about China, that's for sure.
Yeah, this is where it gets interesting.
The document basically says that China's trade practices are a direct threat, like a major wrench in the gears of the global system that needs to be dealt with.
So a more, shall we say, assertive posture towards China.
You did say that?
Not exactly a surprise coming from a conservative perspective, but I'm curious, what does that actually look like in practice? Because tough talk only gets you so far in international trade, right?
Absolutely. And that's why they go beyond just the rhetoric. They want to give the USTR the power to basically lead this global rebalancing of trade.
Okay, I'm listening.
It's about moving away from relying so much on China, you see.
Right.
And instead favoring democratic countries, free markets, that whole thing.
So building a kind of like alliance of countries with shared values and then using that leverage to change China's behavior.
That's the idea. Yeah.
Fascinating. So less about striking deals with China one-on-one and more about strengthening ties with allies in Europe, Asia, elsewhere.
100%. But for that to work, they're saying the USTR can't just be some, sidelined group of negotiators.
Right, they need to have some teeth.
Exactly. More funding, more top-tier people, folks who can go head-to-head with other agencies and really make the president's trade agenda a reality.
So it's like they're saying to the USTR, hey, you're not just haggling over tariffs anymore. This is an ideological battle out there.
That's a good way to put it.
No pressure.
Right. And they see the CEA playing a key role here, too, by the way.
Oh, right, the CEA.
Remember that big economic report of the president they put out every year?
Vaguely, yeah. Lots of charts and graphs, as I recall.
That's the one. Well, this document says it can be way more than just a boring technical document.
Sure.
They want the CEA to use it strategically to build up the credibility of the president's economic agenda on the world stage.
So it's like, here's our economic plan, everyone. We've run the numbers, and trust us, it's going to be great.
Exactly. They're saying that a strong economic case, backed up by all that data the CEA can provide, can be a really powerful tool in international negotiations.
Especially when you're trying to get other countries on board with your vision.
Exactly.
Interesting. So we've got the NEC calling the shots, the USTR playing hardball on trade, and the CEA crunching numbers to win over hearts and minds globally.
A lot of moving parts.
That's a pretty potent economic game plan they've got laid out there.
Yeah, they've clearly thought this through.
But we're not quite done yet, right? There's one more area we need to touch on.
Oh, that's right. We haven't even gotten to their ideas for science and technology policy.
Oh, right, because no modern presidency is complete without a plan for science and technology, right?
It's become pretty central.
What do they have in store on that front?
Well-
Science and technology policy?
Yeah.
Not exactly the first thing that comes to mind when I think about, presidential power moves.
Right.
But this document seems to have some strong opinions on it.
They definitely do. It's interesting. They really see a conservative president as having this, vital role to play, making sure science and technology are used responsibly, effectively, in a way that aligns with their values,
Okay, color me intrigued. So paint me a picture. Which agencies are we talking about here, and what kind of changes are they proposing?
Well, a big one is the Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP. They call it the President's Science Advisor.
Right, right.
They're weighing in on everything from climate change to AI.
Yeah, it's a pretty broad portfolio.
Huge. And this document, it argues that the OSTP has gotten a little too focused on, and I'm quoting here, social engineering.
Social engineering. Okay.
Yeah.
Give me some examples so I know what we're talking about.
Sure. They're talking about things like, initiatives to get more diversity in STEM fields, research focused on racial disparities in healthcare, that kind of thing.
Got it.
Areas where they think the focus should be on, scientific excellence, merit, not so much on social justice goals.
So they're pushing back against what they see as an overly political approach to science.
Exactly. They're all about keeping scientific inquiry, pure,
Yeah.
free from ideology, driven by data, objective analysis. And one thing they seem particularly worried about is what they call a bias towards certain conclusions, especially when it comes to climate change.
Yeah, that's a hot topic if there ever was one, where science and politics, they get really messy, really fast. So what do they actually want to do about it?
Well, they're calling for a major shakeup of the U.S. Global Change Research Program.
Okay.
That's the main government body in charge of coordinating climate change research. They think it's become too one-sided.
Interesting.
They want to bring in a broader range of perspectives.
So that would mean bringing in scientists who might disagree with the, let's call it, the mainstream view on climate change,
Uh-huh.
which I'm guessing some people won't like very much.
Yeah, it's definitely going to ruffle some feathers.
Right.
But they're really serious about wanting a more open, more transparent debate about the science. And they're willing to, make some enemies along the way.
And this isn't just about climate change, right? This feels like part of a larger push to change how science is funded, how it's done, the whole thing.
Absolutely. Like, they're really concerned about this trend of factoring in social impact when deciding what to fund. They're saying federal dollars should go to the projects that'll do the most to advance knowledge, drive innovation, and, not necessarily the ones that tick certain social agenda boxes.
So a more, let's say, traditional approach to science policy, focused on, as they see it, these core ideas of objectivity and excellence. It's another really clear example of how this document is trying to put a conservative stamp on the executive branch.
Totally. And it's not just theoretical, they actually get into the nitty-gritty of how specific agencies, like the EPA, should operate.
The EPA, tricky one, especially when it comes to, well, those environmental regulations.
Exactly. Their view is that regulations have gotten way too burdensome, like they're stifling growth, holding back innovation.
Yeah.
They want a more streamlined approach, a cost-effective approach, one that, in their words, balances protecting the environment with the needs of businesses.
So less red tape, more flexibility. Makes sense for some industries, for sure. But what about the impact on the environment itself? It feels like that's a pretty big piece of the puzzle they might be, glossing over.
For sure. It's complicated, high stakes all around. And this document, as we've seen, is coming at this from a particular angle, right?
Right.
Prioritizing deregulation, economic growth, whether that's the right balance or not, well, that's an ongoing debate.
Exactly. And we have to acknowledge that, there are other points of view. We're just trying to lay bare the thinking, the goals behind this particular vision of how things should be.
100%. And it's worth pointing out, even within this document, they seem to realize that getting what they want takes more than just executive orders, or putting their people in the right jobs.
Right. So it's not a quick fix. They see it more as a long game.
Exactly. They talk a lot about working with Congress, passing actual laws to make their vision stick, make it a lot harder for future administrations to undo.
So it's about building something that lasts, not just winning in the moment. It's a really interesting way of thinking about executive power. Not just about making changes here and now, but about really steering the ship of state in a new direction for the long haul.
Absolutely. And that actually brings us to their vision for the vice president, which honestly, I found pretty fascinating.
Okay, I am very curious about that.
Oh.
Because honestly, the VP often seems like, kind of an afterthought. Shows up for ceremonies, casts the deciding vote if there's a tie. But they're saying there's a much bigger role for the VP to play.
Oh, yeah. Way more than just a ceremonial position. They see the VP as this really unique and powerful asset.
Okay, I'm all ears.
They're basically saying that, the VP is elected by the whole country, right? But they're also part of the executive branch.
Right.
And that gives them a platform, real leverage to push the president's agenda.
So less about cutting ribbons and more about, really getting things done.
Exactly. And they get into the specifics. First off, staffing the VP's office.
Okay.
They want strong and sound policy minds in there, people who are totally on board with the president's vision and can, hit the ground running.
No time for on-the-job training.
Nope. And then they see the VP as this key player on Capitol Hill. Remember, the VP is also president of the Senate.
Right. I always forget that.
So they're in this perfect position to work with senators, build relationships, smooth things over when there are disagreements.
The ultimate insider.
Exactly. And it doesn't stop there. They also want the VP to be the point person on big policy initiatives, become the face of certain issues, really get out there and advocate for the president's agenda, build support.
It's interesting that it's like they're taking a page from what we're seeing in the current administration, where the VP has had a really visible role on things like, I don't know, space exploration, voting rights,
Exactly. It's about using the VP strategically, making the most of their time, their political capital.
It's a really different way of thinking about the vice presidency, taking it from this, like, vague supporting role and making them a real power player.
It's pretty fascinating, and it really highlights, I think, the main takeaway from this whole document, which is that they believe a conservative president has to be bold, has to be willing to use every single tool at their disposal to reshape things, to make the executive branch their own.
It's been pretty wild going through this blueprint for executive power. Budgets, regulations, national security, even science policy. Whether you agree with everything they're saying or not, you got to admit, it's a really detailed, really thought-provoking look at how a conservative president might approach this massive, powerful institution.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that the presidency is about way more than just the person in the Oval Office.
Right.
It's this huge web of advisors, agencies, all these different groups pushing and pulling, trying to shape the direction of the country. And I think understanding how it all works, the different visions for how it should work, it's crucial for all of us, right?
Couldn't agree more. And on that note, I'll leave you with a question to ponder. In a democracy like ours, one that's supposed to be about checks and balances, how much power should one person, the president, and their advisors actually have? There's no easy answer, but it's something worth thinking about, especially as we head into this election year. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.